This video will demonstrate the removal and replacement of the reciprocator on your Highland single head embroidery machine. Please watch this video in its entirety before attempting this repair. This will include some significant disassembly and reassembly of your machine, including removing the sewing head from the machine. So if at any point in time you are uncomfortable with anything that you're seeing being demonstrated, please do not attempt this repair. Instead, call your tech support line. The reason you might replace the reciprocator is due to damage to the unit, and this is the reciprocator. This particular part is what drives the needle bars up and down in your machine so that the machine will sew. This little area in here grabs the needle bar boss and drives it up and down as the machine is sewing. If there is damage to any part, either this lower piece right down here or this upper piece right here, if the edges are not nice and clean, if it's cracked or broken, or this area right here is chipped, then the machine will either not pick up the needle bar at all or will intermittently pick up the needle bar. And this would be consistent across all the needles of your machine rather than just one needle. If all other needles sew except for one or two, then the issue is probably not your reciprocator. But if all the needles will not sew or will not pick up, then the problem likely is your reciprocator. Also, sometimes when this bar right here has been bent by striking a hoop, which is what would also tend to break the upper part of the reciprocator here, then what will happen is there will be play so that this would move up and down apart from the entire reciprocator unit. If that's the case, then that will cause the machine to intermittently skip stitches or not sew very well, causing loopy sewing or something like that, loops and skips. So the reason you would replace again the reciprocator would be because you've struck a hoop and now none of the needles work, or some other accident has happened with the machine and none of the needles are sewing. And that would require the replacement of the reciprocator. Again, please watch this entire video before attempting this repair, and if at any point in time you're uncomfortable with what you're seeing, do not attempt to do this repair. For this repair, you will need a 3mm Allen key, a 2.5mm Allen key, and a number 2 Phillips head or plus driver. First, we're going to open the thread take-up lever guard, and we're going to unthread the machine. Take the thread out of the needles and out of the take-up spring guide rail. We're just going to push these off to the side, out of our way. Next, we're going to remove the thread take-up spring guide. It's a Phillips head on each side of the unit. And set it aside. Now we'll remove the lower plate. Sometimes the lower plate has a screw in the center. This one we're just going to slide it off. And now we're going to remove the upper plate. Again, 2 Phillips head screws. We need to make sure our thread's out of the way, so this will come off. Okay, and now we're going to send the machine to needle number 1 to more easily facilitate the removal of the head. Next, using our 3mm Allen key, we're going to remove 4 screws. One here, one here, one here, and one here. Next, we're going to remove the plastic cover back here. I'm going to press down about 1.5 inches, 2 inches on each side with your thumb or your fingers and pull it forward and lift it back. With the access panel off, you're going to snip the small zip tie that's holding the upper cable on and remove it by pulling gently and carefully out. Then the lower one that goes on the thread break detector board, you'll lift carefully and pull it off. And then just set those out of the way. Next, we're going to carefully lift the head up off the machine, turn it up and set it on top of the thread rack with a piece of cardboard or something to cushion it from the top of the thread rack. Before going any further, you can inspect closely from this position the reciprocator to see if it is indeed damaged. Again, we're looking for any chips, any broken piece from here, anything broken off of this top part of the assembly, or any broken parts off the lower part of the assembly. If the reciprocator appears to be undamaged, do not complete the repair without consulting your tech. Also, you'll want to inspect to see that the reciprocator only moves a little bit up and down when you push up and down on it. Okay? If there's a lot of play when you move up and down, and it's possible that the rod is bent on the side, not the main shaft here, but this plate right here could be a little bit bent, allowing it to move up and down. It should move a little bit. You notice that I'm holding the reciprocator in place while moving the slide block up and down, and it has only a smallest amount of play. Also, this motor on the side right here is the reciprocator actuator, and there's a little knob on it that you can turn to manually actuate the reciprocator. So when I turn the knob toward me, you'll see that it has an arm that pushes the reciprocator out of the way. That's important because this will be the thing that releases the needle bars when the machine comes to a stop, as well as you can manually release it if you've pulled a needle bar down and you just want to raise it up again. You can just twist the knob on this side and cause it to go release the needle bar. Next, we're going to remove 3 panels. Remove these 2 Phillips head screws. And these 2 Phillips head screws. You'll notice that the panels are different, so when you get ready to put them back on, you shouldn't have any trouble keeping them separate. The panel on the left is solid. The panel on the right has a couple of slots in it that are access points for oiling the interior of the moving head, of the fixed head, excuse me. Now we're going to remove the lower one. Next, we're going to use our 2mm Allen key to loosen a set screw that holds the rod in place on the left-hand side of the fixed head. So loosen it just about a turn. And then looking at the top guide rail, this is the rail actually here that allows the head, the moving head, to move back and forth as it's color changing. And then this is the take-up lever guide rail right here. You'll notice in the center, this is the take-up lever driver. Right in front of that, there are 2 small holes. And in each of those holes are the tops where the bar that the reciprocator rides on comes out. So the leftmost one is for the reciprocator, and it has in it a wick for the oil to get down to the reciprocator. So we're going to remove the wick by pulling up. I'm just using a small Allen key to pull the wick up out of the needle bar, excuse me, the reciprocator shaft, and pull it out of the way. And having loosened the set screw that holds the reciprocator shaft in place, I'm going to begin to push the reciprocator through the top. Sometimes you can use a small Allen key to help a little bit if you need to. We're just going to push this up through the top and pull this shaft out. You'll notice that the bearing and the felt have fallen off the bottom of the shaft, and we'll put that back on when we get back to putting it together. We pull it up until the shaft is out. With the reciprocator shaft removed, we can now pivot the bottom of the reciprocator and pull the reciprocator out of the machine. Next, install the new reciprocator, essentially reversing the procedure. This rod link right here is what drives the reciprocator up and down. So we'll need to ensure that we install the new reciprocator with the boss into the rod, and then tip it and push it back until the rod goes back onto the guide rail to the right and is essentially straight up and down. Then we're going to reinstall the shaft that the reciprocator rides on. Now you'll notice that the shaft on one end has a milled out flat spot, and that's where the set screw goes down here. It's going to set against that. So when we put the rod back in, we want to make sure that this is at the bottom, not at the top. Okay? And that when we get ready to tighten that set screw, it's going down into this direction so that the flat side for the set screw is on the left. To install the reciprocator shaft, again, we're going to ensure that the flat part where the set screw goes in first, and it's pointing to the left. We're going to pull the felt out of the way and begin to set the shaft down through the hole. Once we've got it started, then we're going to feed it onto the reciprocator. With the shaft started, we're going to slide it down and fit it onto the reciprocator, again ensuring that my flat side is to the left. Just continue to press the shaft down till it goes onto the other guide. We want to make sure it's on the guide there, and down to here. At this point, we want to stop pushing the shaft down. At this point, we want to stop pushing the shaft down and put the bearing and the felt. Continue to push it down, ensure that these get centered up on the shaft, and continue to push the shaft down until it's fully seated. Next, I'm going to use our 2mm Allen key to now tighten this set screw. So just start tightening it. You'll probably see, if you've got the flat spot over on the correct side pointing to the left, you'll probably see the shaft turn just a little bit as that set screw is going tight. Next, we're going to tuck the wick back down into the hollow part of the reciprocator shaft, and I'm just using a small Allen key to feed it down in there, and then just carefully put it back in all the way so it's below the surface and into below the surface of the rail and into the shaft. Next, we're going to put the plates on. I'm going to start with the lowest plate that we took off. You'll notice that it has a notch at the bottom that's going to fit over this finger, and a little cutout here that's going to go around the bearing. I'm going to place it in here. If necessary, you may need to use a screwdriver to move it up or down a little bit so that the bearing will fit through the notch, and then just move that little felt around so that the flat spot is against the plate. And if you remember, we had two countersunk flat screws that held this in place. Then we'll put on our other two dust covers. Remember, these use the Phillips head screws. Also remember that they were unique. The solid one goes on the left, and you'll notice the little angle that they match on. I'm going to line up the two holes. I'm going to push it out just a little bit so that it's not going to interfere with my reciprocator assembly at all. And then tighten them well. Now my left side dust cover. And you'll notice that it also has the slots here for being able to access the oil of these two knuckles, and the slot here for being able to oil in this area. You also notice it has a little cutout that matches there. And again, we want to make sure that it's not up against anything or interfering with anything there. And tighten these. Before putting the moving head back on the machine, we want to ensure that you've got all three plates back on. Otherwise, you'll have to take the head back off in order to put those plates back in on the machine. Next, we want to make sure the machine is at 100, or the heads up position, and you can do that by pressing the little square heads up button on your control panel and having the machine cycle to 100. A couple of other things we need to take note of before putting the moving head back on the machine. First, this is the bar on which the moving head will be attached. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 of the places that we took the 4 screws off to remove it, and we're going to use those obviously again. Okay. Another thing is the take-up lever driver. This is what drives the take-up levers up and down. This rail right here is the take-up lever guide rail, and we've got to make sure that the take-up levers are in the correct position so that they sit on this rail correctly. And the positioning finger, which positions the rotary thread rate sensors, which are mounted on the back of the fixed head. This is a part where it's just a little bit tricky. See where my finger is pushing on this little circuit board assembly? This is the rotary thread brake sensor. This little slot right here goes on the positioning finger here. So when we get ready to put the head onto the machine, we need to make sure that this positioning finger is lined up with this board. Since we took the head off on position number 1, and my machine still reads needle number 1, I'm going to put the head back on position number 1 as well. The retaining finger down here also matches the underside of this rail right here. So that finger needs to fit up inside that portion right there. So when we set this down, we're going to be setting this rail down into that little finger, onto this moving part, and also that we need our take-up lever guide to match these little notches on the back of my take-up levers, and those rest on this guide right there. So we've got several things all happening kind of at one time. Also, needle number 1, this is where the take-up lever driver goes, right in that little slot there. So it's got to match this right here. So we've got several things happening at one time that we're all going to coordinate together. So we bring our head down, we fit it onto that retaining finger, which is just kind of sitting in place. Then we bring it up so that needle number 1 is coming, the needle bar boss, the take-up lever boss is coming to the driver. And then I've got to position that little board we talked about all the way back over here to this side so that when all of this sets in, all that's going to set in together. I'm going to position these up just a little bit so they'll set down on the rails. And when everything's in there, then everything's engaged properly. And I've got my bearing into my color change motor, the worm gear that's back there. So everything's in there. My bottom's locked in, see, because my bottom doesn't pull forward. And my little black moving rail here is fit in behind the head. Then we begin to put the screws in, just finger tight. We just want to hold it in position while we get the other ones in. Before we tighten anything up, we're going to check several different items to make sure that the head is installed correctly. First, we want to make sure that all the take-up levers are all lined up straight across. Second, since we took the machine off of needle number 1, we want to make sure that the first bearing is engaged in the worm gear and that the machine indicates needle number 1 on the control panel. Third, we want to ensure that the positioning finger is in the guide for our rotary thread brake sensors. Once we've verified that the head is correctly installed on the machine, then we're going to tighten our 4 3mm Allen keys that hold it in place. These need to be more than finger tight, but they don't have to be super tight. Next, we're going to reinstall the cabling to the thread brake detect sensor and the on-off switch. The cable ends are different so that you shouldn't get them confused. This one is for the thread brake detect system. Just going to place it in, and you can't put it in backwards, and carefully press it in until it's all the way down. Next, I'm going to take the connector that connects to your light over here, the on-off light, and slide it on to the connector. Then we're going to re-zip tie the cable that we cut earlier. About halfway down that bar. Using another small zip tie or cable tie, very similar to the one that I cut off. And it needs to be able to move just a little bit. It's just to hold that cable up out of the way. And then we're going to clip off that little bit extra. All right, with both cables reconnected and the top one zip tied in place, now I'm going to put the plastic cover back on. There's a little notch right here that matches a notch on this side, and there's one on each side, so that's going to come up and go into those notches. And then there's notches at the top that will fit in a notch on the top as well. Remember, we had to press down on the top to release it from the back. So we go into position, press down again, and pull it forward. It's locked into place. We're now ready to install the covers on the front of the machine. So the one with the slot goes on first on top. You want to make sure that you don't trap your threads behind it, so kind of lift them up out of the way, press it into place. You remember they had 2 Phillips head screws, one on each side. They're going to go on the upper of the 2 holes on this faceplate. The lower of the 2 holes we're going to use to reinstall our thread take-up springs. One on the left and one on the right. We slide our lower thread plate throat, take 2. Now we'll slide our lower face plate in behind and across. If yours has a screw, you can reinsert it there. At this point, you're ready to rethread the machine and try sewing with it. Last but not least, you want to ensure that, number 1, it will transition across all of your needles. So you can start at needle number 1 and then transition to your last needle. If it's needle 15, and transition all the way to needle 15. And we're ensuring that it's moving back and forth without any binding or any noise or anything like that. It should move just like it did before you started.